So apart from being a highly regulated industry, real estate is also full of lots of different risks in business. So some of these are operational risks. So one could be inefficient staff. Now, if you look at an agency that I know of in Sunnybank Hills, they operate with about 60 to 70 staff in their agency. So if one administration person is away sick one day, then it's not such a massive risk as they've got many people to cover that role. However, if you're working in a smaller agency and there's only one property manager, one salesperson and an admin, if the property manager was away sick for any extended period of time, then that's a huge risk to the agency as there's nobody there to cover the different duties and roles that they have. So inefficient staff can be a big risk for some agencies. Lack of knowledge is also a big one in real estate. As you've seen, there's a lot of legislation. We've barely even scratched the surface so far in the course. So there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of and need to educate yourself on. Now, if for example, somebody hasn't done the proper training and they're not doing CPD training, they may be saying or providing the information and advice to consumers which is actually incorrect. And that can lead to breaches, cancellation of license, as well as fines from fair trading and lawsuits as well from consumers. So it's really important that if you're not sure of something, that you find the answer. IT threats as well can be a big one. A lot of businesses these days rely very heavily on computers, as we do in real estate. Now, if we look especially at a property management software program where we have tenants paid due dates for rents, maintenance issues, lease expiries, rental arrears, contact details, banking information, all of this stuff that's stored on the computer. Now imagine if you lost all of that information and you had 800 properties that were part of your rent roll in your agency. That is a huge risk to the office. You'll have to rely on hard copy files if you have them, or start from scratch. Now you can lose a lot of business that way, which is obviously a massive risk to the office. So IT threats can be a big one, especially for property management. Even in sales, you may have been a salesperson for 10 or 15 years and you have a huge database of sellers and buyers, and then you lose all of that information. And starting from scratch can be a massive job. You also have financial risks. So loss of income. So this could be as simple as not completing an agency agreement correctly, which means that the seller does not have to pay you your commission, or it could be fines from breaching legislation. So these are just a few risks. An agency must ensure that they have a proper risk management plan in place to be able to minimise the risk and loss to the office as well as individuals. So we'll have a look at how you can actually do that on the next slide. So the risk assessment strategy is a 4-step process. So the first step in risk assessment would be to identify risks. So where can you identify risks? You could do a walkthrough, you could hire a professional, do group discussions on the different risks that you face in real estate. It could be agency records, past complaint registers, fair trading website, real estate news websites. Anywhere really you can identify different types of risks that you may be exposed to in real estate. The next step would be to analyse and evaluate risks. So analysing risks is taking the likelihood of that risk occurring and then what the consequence of the risk is. The next step in the risk assessment process is to develop risk treatment measures. So a treatment measure is how you're actually going to fix or reduce the risk. So the first best option is to avoid risk completely. So let's take the risk of having unregistered staff working in the office. A licensee can eliminate this risk completely by ensuring that every single staff member, when they start, has their certificate or license. You can also look up on New South Wales Fair Trading website to see if somebody is licensed. The next best option, if you can't avoid a risk completely, is to reduce it. So that might be to either reduce the likelihood of it happening or to reduce the consequence of it. So let's have a look at the risk of somebody stealing something in an open for inspection. So you can't avoid it because you can't control other people, but you can reduce the likelihood of it occurring by ensuring that the occupants of the property put their valuables away, ensuring you're collecting people's details as they're coming through the open home, proper supervision at the open home, so looking out for what people are doing as they're walking through, having one entry and exit point to the home, so you can see if somebody's walking out with a TV, not likely obviously, but all of these things can help reduce the likelihood of something being stolen in an OFI. And even if you do all of those things, something still may slip through the cracks, so you can reduce the consequence by having proper insurances in place. So if somebody was to steal something, then you've got insurance that covers it, which will reduce the consequence of the risk occurring. Your next best option, if you can't avoid or reduce it, is to transfer it. So let's take cars, for example. If you own a car, you can't avoid having an accident because you can't control everybody else on the road. You can reduce the likelihood by not speeding and not going through red lights, but again, you can't control other people on the road. So you transfer the risk by having insurance. So if you were to crash or something was to happen, it's the insurance company that's going to be covering the expense of the car and your medical bills. The next best option, apart from avoiding, reducing or transferring, is to finance the risk. So financing a risk is simply having money set aside. So if the risk was to occur, then you would have money to pay for it. So it's just like having your own personal savings, a safety net account, saving it for a rainy day. And the last treatment measure is to retain a risk. So you might reduce the likelihood and consequence to a level that you're happy with, and then you're just happy to accept that there's risk in doing any business and you're not going to be able to get rid of them all, so we'll just cross our fingers and hope that it doesn't happen. So the last step in the risk assessment strategy is to monitor and review your treatment strategies. So if I go back to the one that we did before, so we avoided the risk of having unregistered staff working in the office. That's not always going to be an effective treatment measure because staff need to renew their license. So how do you actually monitor that treatment measure that you've put in place? So that would be to ensure that prior to the expiry of people's registration certificates, you have that logged somewhere. So you'll have reminders come up either in your Outlook calendar or on whatever software program you were using to record important dates, to ensure that staff are renewing their registration or license. So that's a way that you're monitoring one of your risk treatment measures. So all agencies should have some form of risk assessment strategy that follows that same outline. So identify the risk, analyse it, what treatment measure are you going to put in place, and then how are you going to monitor that to ensure that it is still effective.